Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Gastola, and welcome to another edition of the Movie Brat, to show at the end of the week where I take an opportunity to unwind after a long week of producing journalism and use the channel to go over some movies that I'm looking forward to or movies I've seen recently, and then discuss a major story from the world of cinema, from the world of film. So, thank you. And before we go on with the show, take a moment to subscribe to the show if you haven't already. Be a subscriber to the channel, and you'll be alerted when videos are posted. What I'd like to discuss today for the main story is what's going to happen to Turner Classic Movies. Having TCM has been a big part of my ability to discover cinema and to just explore different eras and different trends that existed and types of movies. I primarily depend upon it these days to tune into Noir Alley with Eddie Muller and to watch these movies that have a cynicism and realism about post World War II life, that are windows into a cultural moment, windows into history, seeing how people managed production code that was imposed on them creatively. They had to navigate it. And then at the same time, they were able to deal with social issues. They were able to subvert some of the conventions of filmmaking through the production of these noir films that were, you know, changing the way that cinema was, introducing characters and exploring subject matters that were often too provocative. But now they were pushing the boundaries with these noir films. And sometimes they were procedurals that did have a top down kind of powerful entity that was narrating them. It seemed to be about law and order. But for the most part, the best noirs were about those characters that were neither good nor bad, but were complex and were, trying to feel their way through some kind of seediness in their lives, and how can they deal with all of that. So TCM, without it, there are so many movies that I don't think I would know about. But I've also had an opportunity to spend time with family, to sit around with my parents, and to sit around with my grandparents, to put it on and talk about movies that have played on TCM, and also tell them to look for movies that are going to be airing on TCM. And this is a way we bond. And I think there's a lot of families. And so right now we have billionaire David Zaslav, the CEO of Warner Brothers Discovery. That's him. He was at a commencement. He gave the commencement speech at Boston University, and the students there were shouting and yelling at him, and they say, "We don't want you here." They were also chanting this because we have a writer's strike on.
Some people
Pay your writers. And this is a nice avatar for what it's like to be a billionaire, what billionaires are in the United States. And the way he's going about managing Warner Brothers Discovery is what you'd expect from someone who is more important, who finds it more important to squeeze out profits rather than to really invest in and make it easier for people to create films or television. Or he owns CNN as well. So creating a news network or maintaining a news network. He's not really interested in anything like making those better or ensuring that they can function strongly. He wants to make sure that the bottom line is being raised and that he can squeeze more profits. And so, what we have happening is that uh, there's been, uh, I think, 70 people were laid off. There were dozens of people that were laid off. There were just a bunch of managers at TCM no longer have their jobs. And the panic is that the channel is going to be lost, that this curation, this group of people that have taken it on as their cultural duty to keep this history alive, to keep people engaged in these movies, to remind younger people like me and people even younger than me, they can introduce them to new movies that they don't know about, and broaden their understanding of movies beyond what is being played right now in theaters, which there isn't much of an original language for movies. It's all superhero movies, reboots, remakes, and it's all just very much driven by what existed before. And so you would think that you would want people to be in touch with those older classics. But if you are gutting this channel and people cannot run it, then you're going to make it implode. And then you'll be left with just this content. And I think what Zaslav wants to do as a billionaire is just be able to license this. And he would like to get around having actual people who he has to pay to curate and manage this library, and also be historians who are connecting with an audience. And they do a film festival. He lowered the budget for the film festival. So you have this happening. And I'm going to read some parts of what we're learning from The Wrap. The Wrap says in an exclusive that the restructuring that is happening with TCM has left this cable channel, quote, dispersed over this massive mega corporate bureaucratic mess. All is well, a headline read in January, as hosts of the Turner Classic Movies channel had assured fans or assuaged fans' fears following an upheaval. 6 months later, we've got top executives, including a 25-year veteran, Paula Shengnon, that are out, and the channel's future is uncertain. And what we're seeing is that we have now slashed the amount of employees there from 90 to 20. The responsibilities of overseeing the network are now distributed among other units under the Warner Brothers Discovery umbrella. So the team is less of a team to manage this. Budgets have already been progressively cut. So they're farming most people out into different departments. Now the person who's running TCM is actually the man who is in charge of Cartoon Network. He doesn't oversee any part of TCM other than the podcasts and the duty of production. It's a nominal title so that they can say there's a person overseeing TCM as a unit, but in fact, it's just dispersed over all throughout the company. So now you have executives like Zaslav, or people who work with Zaslav that are trying to spin what's happening and make it seem like this isn't a big deal, what's going to happen. But everyone's really panicked. And if you were, paying any attention to what happened this week, you saw that there were people who came in, the filmmakers, Steven Spielberg, Martin Scorsese, Paul Thomas Anderson, had a meeting with Zaslav. They don't want to see the channel lost. Then you had Ryan Reynolds, we'll get to. You have all these different actors and creative people who have been speaking up. So there's a now former TCM employee who said, I think the layoffs were their pretext for wanting to restructure things because they don't believe in the approach that we take to programming. They're used to making a cheap show, playing it 1,000 times, and monetizing it with commercials. They have a formula for how to create shows that doesn't apply to TCM, and they've never really thought through what the implications of those differences are. The direction had been TCM generates less revenue than the Food Network, so you should spend more time on that. It literally happened to someone in the talent department who was hired for TCM, but then repurposed. So they're taking this person who was hired for TCM and saying, well, hey, we don't really need you. There's nothing much to do with TCM. We'll just send you to Food Network. And we can see what's going to happen with the library if we look at Max, HBO Max. HBO Max has thrown up a bunch of different titles from the TCM library onto the streaming service. And when you access them, they aren't curated. There's no organization. Nobody's trying to show them to you in any meaningful way. And it's not clear why those selections were chosen. Whereas on TCM, you have days of programming that are built around actors or actresses or directors or a year or Oscar winners or something that has to do with producers or directors or set design or subject matter. Could be race. Maybe it has to do with class. Maybe it has to do with films that represent women. Maybe it has to do with some kind of history related to World War II or Korean War or the Vietnam War. Whatever they would like to do, they have people who focus on programming so that they are presented in a manner that is engaging. And there's intros and there's outros. Well, the company is thinking of cutting those outros and having less of these people who are hosts involved in introducing this content to us. So that would mean we have less of an opportunity to meet film historians or be introduced to people who are doing this cultural work. So someone like an Eddie Muller, someone like a Ben Mankiewicz, who's actually descended from Hollywood royalty, so to speak, but bringing in these individuals, we're less likely to be introduced to them and appreciate the passion that they bring to presenting these movies to us. And I think that's sad. I think that's sad that those people are not valued. But we know that right now, as this all happens, we're in a moment where there's a writer's strike. So all of this is happening with the writer's strike as a backdrop, of gutting TCM, purging streaming content from these services. Warner Brothers Discovery under David Zaslav, he was the first one to really start to just pull down content from HBO and take it away from people so they didn't have to pay residuals to the writers and anyone else who was owed money from that content. So, I'm left feeling exactly like these kids. We don't want you here. We don't want you here. Maybe there's a Ocean Gate expedition that David Zaslav can climb aboard so that we're all spared the destruction that he is bringing to cultural history. I mean, this is shared language. We all talk about these classic films from The Godfather, Casablanca. He's got a library that he wants to sell. They're working on negotiating $500 million deal to sell film and TV music publishing assets. And remarkably, one of those pieces of music might be As Time Goes By from Casablanca, which is actually part of an intro or part of a title screen for TCM. It's used in there. I don't know if they would lose the rights to that and have to redo that, but part of their identity, again, might have to shift. He doesn't really care about any of the things that make TCM what it is as a channel. Anything is on the table right now so he can try and squeeze tens of millions of dollars out. And then he's going to take bonuses for himself. He's going to take a higher salary. He's going to pocket it. And then when he's done, after he's gutted it, and especially if he's tired of running the show and everything is falling apart, he'll just leave. He'll sell it to somebody else, and it'll be hollowed out. This is this is what this is what they do. They are parasites. So there was a good column that was written over at IndieWire. Dear David Zaslav, gutting TCM will not help you win filmmakers back to Warner Brothers. He's talked a good game about how much he loves TCM. He was at a TCM film festival. He claims that he cares about all of this, but I mean, I wouldn't take him seriously. Unfortunately, Steven Spielberg, Martin Scorsese, and P.T. Anderson put out a joint letter. I think they're giving Zaslav too much credit. He is not going to back away from whatever plans he has to gut TCM. So James has a good comment here. Along with the established classics that continue to inspire actors, filmmakers, and historians, TCM shows pre-codes, B-level noir, short subjects from comedy to travelogue, cartoons, B-westerns, silence, etc. We can't lose access to all of that important film history. So, they have it, and they play it all in this one location. It makes sense for us to gather here in this space. But it seems like what Zaslav would like to do is just take different pieces of film history and give them away to a bunch of different services rather than have a place that we can go. I'm afraid that this might end up impacting Criterion Channel. I'm afraid this might end up affecting, the kinds of movies that we're able to see just in general. I mean, they might choose to just sit on these properties that are too much work to get into the hands of different streaming services. So we could have movies that are not accessible for viewing, and I think are effectively lost because nobody is able to see them. People don't buy DVDs anymore, so if they're not uploaded or licensed to different services, if they're like in some kind of a vault or just like kept hidden because a billionaire doesn't want to go to the trouble to distribute them, then we don't get to watch them. So Patton Oswalt, comedian, goddamn you, Zaslav, you couldn't just leave this one alone. Big film nerd. And then there's Ryan Reynolds, who Turner Classic Movies has been a fixture in my life for as long as I can remember. It's a holy corner of film history and a living, breathing library for an entire art form. Please don't fuck with TCM. And I share that as much as anybody else who would express it. So there's a mantra. TCM has a mantra. They developed this when they were putting together the channel. This is the ethos that they wanted to create. TCM is in the business of keeping classic movies alive. Our role is not only to share the wealth of classic movies, but also to preserve it, create a new and growing audience. Our mission is to turn fans into zealots, casual viewers into fans, and newcomers into the classic movie lovers of the future. TCM is proud to play a unique role in American culture. We will defy categorization, advocate risk-taking as we meet the challenge of expanding the relevance of classic movies and transcending the limitations of television. TCM will be the leading source of new perspectives on classic movies. Just the other day, I'm sitting and they put on this reel. They've cut together all of these examples of blackface in Hollywood. And we've got somebody coming on as a historian, and they're talking about this thing that people might want to turn away from, see as ugly, not talk about, but they're showing it and they're exploring it, and they're talking about all the different aspects of it and the stuff that is grotesque and unpleasant, but also things that are fascinating about what they tell you about the time period in which people were doing that. Actors were putting on blackface. And where are you going to get that? This is in between movies. I'll have these segments that come on in between movies that can hold your attention to the channel before the next movie comes on that they have programmed. The TCM experience, express unconditional love of classic movies and provide unrivaled pleasure and satisfaction. TCM will always be fun, smart, cinematic, and trend setting. TCM understands why we need movies and the importance of classic movies as the intersection of entertainment, culture, and history. Our commercial free programming and our unmistakable style produce a special and intimate dynamic with our audience and a unique TCM state of mind. What's the bottom line? The bottom line is not David Zaslav's bottom line. It's not squeezing out the dollars and getting as much profits out of these classic films. It is that movies matter, that they're dedicated to the art of film, the value of movies, and the intelligence of our audience. We accept the responsibility of advancing the art and commerce of classic movies. Without TCM, classic movies will die with them, part of our cart, and with them, part of our culture. Let me say that again. Without TCM, classic movies will die, and with them, part of our culture. TCM is the guardian of classic movies, the keeper of a cultural flame. And if they cannot do that, where are classic movies going to be? What will we consider classic movies? Classic movies can be anything to different people. And no doubt, classic movies, as time progresses, we'll ask ourselves, what's the classic movies of 1990s? What's the classic movies of the 2000s? We know what the classics are. It's pretty much consensus for the 1930s, the 1940s, 1950s. We've developed the sense of the classics in the 70s. 80s, 90s, not so much, but TCM can be the people who develop what we can consider those classics, and they can study them. They can bring in people, and by playing those films on their channels, and they do play some of these films, they'll popularize them to an audience that has never been introduced to them. And so I think it's really important for us to keep this channel alive. Flash flopped. This is the kind of thing that David Zaslav won't hold back when it comes to investing in, but it's flopped. So here you have Vanity Fair article asking, is TCM paying because the Flash has not made the kind of money? It's made a lot of money, but not the kind that Marvel films have made. And so is David Zaslav saying, we're not going to return the profit we want on the Flash? Let's take it out on TCM. Here's another comment. By the way, TCM is a minuscule part of the company's budget. Zaslav slashing its staff is like a zillionaire losing a bunch of money at the craps table and deciding he needs to skip his mom's birthday present this year to make up for it. One more comment. Ironic that Warner Brothers is destroying Turner Classic Movies while the channel has been in a months-long celebration of the studio's centennial, including at Turner Classic Movies Film Festival. Yet, they were plotting away even while welcoming hosts on the lot and doing PR. I mean, indeed, this is evil. This is what they were doing. They've been planning for months to lay these people off. David Zaslav is not somebody, don't let him hide behind his love of movies. He doesn't love movies. He loves the potential to squeeze out some millions. But once that juice is squeezed, you're left with this rind. You're left with this mess in your hand that you can throw in the garbage, or maybe he'll try to sell it off to someone. And I don't think there's much care in the way that David Zaslav goes about this, but you can see that when you look at billionaires that are involved in anything related to culture or entertainment. The people who are involved are the product, and the product is most important, and the people are secondary to the delivery of the product. And that's the capitalist aspect of David Zaslav's business, and it's the way he views everything. That's why he won't pay the writers. That's why he's working with the different billionaire owners to not give writers a fair contract. The Directors Guild's voting on their agreement with the Alliance Motion Pictures Arts, blah, blah, blah. We'll see if they reject it. They may or may not. and then the actors they don't have a deal yet. They might end up going on strike at the end of the month here. There's a lot happening with this industry, and what's going on with TCM represents where we are right now. There's a kind of a crossroads, and our actors and producers and these writers and all the people who are involved in production, and after everything that we went through with COVID and the pandemic upending all of how movies were produced, and there were less people coming to the theaters, and then what streaming services have done to change the business and the way that we consume film, and less of us are going to the theaters. We're watching these movies on our streaming services, we're watching them on our little handheld phone. Everything's changing, and right now this is about making sure that the people who are involved are not on the cutting block, are treated like human beings. And it's also about saving the films that we all love to watch and talk about and discuss, ones that I might make movies about in the future on this show. And this is why it's so important for us to do as these kids. So I don't know what's going to happen with TCM. Nobody really can say, but it's ominous. We probably will be talking before the year is over about something really upsetting that uh, the David Zaslav will have even more control over these classic films, and that the people who should have control, the people who curate them and work at TCM, will be kicked aside and they won't be involved anymore. And the people who really do love movies will not have any say over how we talk about, consume, and get to see these movies. And that's really just a sad statement about how our society is collectively declining, because what's happening in film is happening in many different sectors of the US. It's happening globally, it's happening in Europe, it's happening all over as you see billionaires do this. And just wish there were more Ocean Gate expeditions available for them to go on, so that we would no longer have to deal with them, because we don't want you here. We don't want you here.